Again with you today, Karim and Irina Ra of Purple Sprout.
Hello, good
And,
morning.
and again, we are answering your questions on our health wave. So, don't know how many questions we'll get to answer today. We're planning to answer at least six. If we do not get to your question, please tune in next time. So, we answer the questions in the order they are received. So, let's get started.
Yes,
The question just reads, what is keto? I think within this framework, we should talk about what is keto, what is ketosis, and then maybe expand on what is ketogenic diet is, and touch upon
yeah,
vegan keto
right.
as well.
I think the easiest way to understand what ketosis is to just generally talk about metabolism and how our metabolism is constructed, what parts of metabolism our body reserves to in order to process certain type of foods. Um, Number one is glycolysis. This is when the body is, this is number one mode. This is the first regimen of metabolism that our body functions, is our body likes carbohydrates. And this is the first line of nutrition because this is the easiest substance for the body to process and turn that into energy. So, however, nowadays we see a lot of unnatural carbohydrates that should not really be there. And this is why the low carb diets and even the keto diet are becoming so popular, because people are understanding little by little, but not yet very much articulated, how what the carbohydrates really are and how they what the real natural carbohydrates should be. So sugars and refined flours, refined grains, those are unnatural carbohydrates, and they don't really grow in nature like that. And this is why we should not resort to them and eat them, of course, because then we are at risk of developing conditions. And this what the idea of low carb diet and ketogenic diet ultimately is. But our body resorts to glycolysis. It wants to process carbohydrates first, especially simple sugars. But the simple sugars are not just that sucrose or glucose, fructose, unnatural glucose processed in in the chemical reactions when they separate the sugar stuff from the whole product. Of course, that's not what it should even be considered for food. So, but natural fructose of fruit. This is number one carbohydrate that our body wants to feed on, and that fructose actually is not the one that would accumulate in the liver and turn into triglycerides, and but it would actually go for the needs of the body, for the entire body, very easily without causing the insulin, because the natural fructose.
By the way, we do have a question here about the difference between refined sugar and fruit.
Okay, so we can answer that question maybe within this framework too.
Okay,
So
sure.
because
So the question is,
we kind of gotten to answer this now.
the question is, refined sugar and fruit, are they the same or different? So we will be answering two questions.
Yes,
within.
right. So since we're talking about glycolysis, this is what we are answering when we're answering these questions too. So, but the natural fructose of fresh fruit, the ions of it are left spinning, and left spinning ion do not require the insulin production, and they can actually enter the cell membrane without having to the guidance of an insulin. And that is
And
how
ions are, so that our viewers can understand.
well the molecules of
The
yeah.
molecules. So if they are left spinning,
There's yes, because
they
because
can
they
enter the cells.
yes, because they're based on different biochemistry, and the isomers of the natural fructose are completely different from what the chemical fructose or sucrose are, and this is a completely different compounds. And why they're mixed together and confused together up until this moment for me is just a mystery, because
Mhm.
it's easy to understand. It's on the surface of biochemistry, and everybody should
Mhm.
really be aware of that.
We are biochemical human beings. We are biochemical
Entities.
entities, machines. Yes. So what we eat also matters in terms of the biochemical composition.
Yes. Well, biochemistry shows that there is energy, not
Mhm.
just one-dimensional flat physical body. But we can talk about it sometime in
Yes.
our future podcasts. But now the fructose enters the cells easily, the fresh fructose. But of course, if there's a surplus, then it will start accumulating only then. But that will depend on how a person look at fruit and how they actually eat the fruit. So that's another question. And let's go on to the next metabolic mode. After glycolysis, our body goes into lipolysis. This is where it wants to resort to in order to extract the energy, um, that by breaking down the fats, oils, saturated fats, any fat that it gets around, but not before it processes. Okay, let's step back a little bit. So glycolysis, uh, the body will continue processing sugar or sugars, or not that table sugar, of course, but the bodily carbohydrates. Uh, all the way until they deplete not only the free circulating carbohydrate within the blood, but then once those deplete, it will reserve to breaking down the glycogen all the way and deplete out of glycogen before it reserves to breaking down fats for energy. And only then lipolysis starts. So first we need to deplete of carbohydrates completely and glycogen including. And glycogen is like a starchy substance that animals or humans produce, and they store that within the liver, within the muscle, in order to reserve to once the carbohydrates are depleted and we are in a kind of starvation mode. Then the body starts using the glycogen, not but and but not the fats, not before it depletes out of it. And then once it depletes out of glycogen, then it turns into breaking down the fats, and the fats will not be the ones that it's easily consumed, that we easily consuming from our uh, nutrition, but those fats actually that are being stored. So the dietary fats will not be processed to the high amount until the body begins to breaking down its own stored fats within the tissues, within the adipose tissue, um, and this is uh, and when the fats are broken down, they release uh, ammonia. They release the ketones. I'm sorry. And the ketone now is the nutrient that the organs would consume and function and utilize as energy.
Mhm.
So the ketone
Utilize
bodies.
for fuel.
Yes,
Mhm.
right. So utilizing the ketones as fuel, this is the purpose of the ketosis. And the caloric output of fats is greater than that of carbohydrates. And at this time, what happens is because a lot of toxins are lodged and stored within the adipose tissue, with the breakdown of the fat tissue of this adipose tissue, these toxins will begin to release, and then they will be moved into the bloodstream, and then we will observe the detox effect. When the body goes into lipolysis, we are observing detox effect, and we are observing the weight loss, and we're observing all these positive things that ketosis actually brings about. But we also need to understand that this is not very natural process for our body. It is natural, but it's not a long term. It should not be used as a long term, years and years, because then
Because
it
it's
is,
unnatural nutrition for
well, it is
a
natural, but
human being.
like for a short, term. Let's
Mhm.
imagine it this way. In the nature, what we observe, for example, in spring, we don't observe much of carbohydrates growing, and carbohydrates are fruit primarily. The fruit is a carbohydrate, not the sugar, because we have sugar all the time, year round, on the shelves in the stores. It's not what we're talking about. In nature, when do we observe the bloom of the carbohydrates? Only in fall. In spring, there is no carbohydrates. If you eat naturally in spring, then you don't really eat much of carbohydrates, unless, of course, you live in a tropical country, but that's a different type of metabolism and different type of setting, different type of conditions there, and that can also be analyzed and understood of why and how then the body and metabolism functions in that climate. But now we're talking about the North America, and where we don't have fruit growing
Year
in,
round.
yes, year round. So in spring, we only have greens, fresh greens, and this is basically the ketosis, because then we deplete of carbohydrate. Especially, we need to do fasting or Lent, and that is promoted by religions even, and this is good for health too, because during winter we accumulate a lot of toxins, because in we eat the fruit, and even that fruit that we preserve from fall, we winter squashes and the root vegetables, we eat those during winter, and we accumulate a lot of fat, because glycogen then turns into the fatty tissue. And then in spring, that once we are naturally deplete out of this um, starchy carbohydrates, then we go into the fasting mode, and we get to lipolysis, in the end anyway, even without having to eat oils or consume oils, dietary fats. We may not introduce them in our nutrition, but we naturally will drift into the lipolysis, where the fat tissue starts breaking down and releasing toxins that have accumulated in this fat tissue into the blood circulation, and in blood, through the blood, those toxins will be eliminated through different elimination channels. So, and this what happens, we get into lipolysis, but we get there short term, not that long, that we stay in lipolysis for a month, maybe even 2 months, in some cases. But then in summer, some fruit become available, and that starts with berries maybe. And little by little, we are introducing carbohydrates back in our nutrition by nature. And then, because we cannot really live without carbohydrates, because this is the first line of nutrition. So any ketogenic diet should be resorted to as the cleansing type of nutrition, but also has to be natural and not based on animal products, because that's not the food for human being, number one. And that cooked fats are trans fats that will not really do you good either. When you consider, ketogenic diet, you should really consider what quality fats you're consuming. And number one is cooking fats and oils is a wrong way to go with ketogenic diet also.
By the way,
Hmm.
we do have a video, a whole video on ketogenic diet, the pitfalls and the benefits on our YouTube channel, that talks about how
Hmm.
temporarily people may experience some benefits due to the fact that animal fats, fats and proteins, for example, are not mixing together with carbohydrates in the
Hmm.
form of grains and lentils and beans and things like that. But again, it's a it should be a temporary measure.